The mountain on the porch. The arrival, the darkness outside Savannah, Georgia, doesn't just fall, it settles. It's a thick, humid blanket that smells of pine needles and damp earth. And at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, that darkness brought a visitor. Nadia Cole was 26. She lived alone at the end of a gravel road that seemed to lead to nowhere. Her house was a small two-bedroom legacy left by her grandmother, a place where the floorboards groaned under your footsteps, and the nearest neighbor was a mile-long echo away. She was coming home from a 12-hour shift at the county hospital. Her eyes were burning from the fluorescent lights, her mind wandering toward a cold bed and a silent kitchen. But as her truck's headlights swept across the front porch, the world stopped. There, sitting perfectly still in the center of the wooden slats, was a titan. He was a South African Boerboel, a boar bull. 200 pounds of rippling, fawn-colored muscle, with a black mask that looked like it had been painted on by a shadow. He didn't have a collar. He didn't have a tag. He didn't even have a name. He just had those eyes, deep, amber brown, and impossibly tired. The rejection? Nadia didn't open the truck door. She sat there for 10 minutes, the engine idling, watching the massive creature. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply sat there with his tongue lolling out sideways, looking at the windshield as if he'd been waiting for her his entire life. She picked up her phone. Animal control? There's a massive dog on my porch. He looks like a Boerboel. The voice on the other end was weary. How big, ma'am? 200 pounds, maybe more. There was a pause. We don't handle anything over 120. Our equipment isn't rated for that. Call a rescue. She called 3. The first was full. The second didn't take power breeds. The third told her they weren't equipped for a dog that could technically take down a lion. Nadia looked at the dog. He had moved. He was now lying on his back, all 4 massive paws pointing at the sky, his belly exposed in the ultimate sign of surrender. She made a decision that her mother would have called insane. She stepped out of the truck. She brought him a mixing bowl of water. He drank it in 8 seconds. She brought him leftover chicken. He ate it in 3 polite bites. Then, the giant moved. He walked over and sat directly on her foot. 200 pounds of solid weight, leaning against her shin. One night, she whispered to the empty woods. You stay one night. That was 7 months ago. The chaos of a titan. Living with a 200-pound dog is not like owning a pet. It's like living with a roommate who is also a forklift. Nadia named him King. The first week was a disaster, wrapped in short, coarse fur. King's tail was not a tail. It was a rhythmic wrecking ball. One happy wag and a shelf of ceramic birds. Her grandmother's pride was reduced to dust. When King tried to jump on the couch, the entire piece of furniture slid 6 inches across the hardwood floor. But the real struggle was the bed. The first night, Nadia pointed to a plush rug on the floor. King looked at the rug. He looked at the bed. Then, he climbed onto the mattress. He didn't sleep on the side. He slept diagonally, claiming 80% of the real estate. Nadia spent the night clinging to the edge of the mattress, shivering, because King was also sleeping on the blanket. She tried the guest room the next night. King sat at the door and let out a whine. It wasn't a high-pitched whimper. It was a low that made the floorboards under Nadia's bed tremble. It sounded like a mourning wail. She opened the door. He walked in, flopped down next to her, and let out a sigh so heavy, it felt like the house had settled another inch into the Georgia clay. He never slept alone again. The silent watch. As the months passed, a routine formed, a dance between a woman and a giant. King had 2 distinct personalities. In the house, he was broken. His tongue hung out at all times, sideways, like a pink ribbon that had lost its grip. He was clumsy. He was goofy. He had selective hearing that only responded to the sound of a cheese wrapper from 3 rooms away. But outside, King was different. Whenever Nadia stepped onto the porch, King's demeanor shifted. He didn't play. He didn't chase squirrels. He would stand at the top of the stairs, his head held high, his ears forward. He tracked every car that moved on the distant gravel road. He watched the shadows of the pine trees as if he were reading a map. Whenever a delivery driver arrived, King didn't bark. He simply walked down the steps and stood between Nadia and the stranger. He was a 200-pound wall of "don't try it." Nadia's friends called him a liability. They said a dog that size was a ticking time bomb. Nadia just remembered the night she came home crying after a horrific shift at the hospital. 3 patients lost in a single night. She had sat on the kitchen floor in the dark, unable to move. King had found her. He didn't lick her face. He didn't bark. He simply walked over, lowered his massive body beside her, and rested his 20-pound head in her lap. He stayed there until the sun came up, his steady, heavy heartbeat vibrating through her skin until she felt whole again. He wasn't a pet. He was her anchor. 3:08 a.m., the breaking point. The night of the incident was a Thursday in October. The air was cool, and the moon was a sliver of bone in the sky. Nadia was at the hospital, finishing a double shift. King was home alone. Earl, the retired neighbor a mile down the road, was sitting on his porch, unable to sleep. Around 3 a.m. he heard it. It wasn't a bark. It was a roar. It was the sound of 200 pounds of South African Boerboel, realizing that his kingdom was being invaded. It was sharp, relentless, and violent. Earl grabbed a heavy flashlight and started walking. When he reached Nadia's property, he saw the flickering of a light inside the house. Not the main lights, the frantic movement of an intruder's flashlight. Then, he heard the sound of glass shattering. King wasn't just barking now. He was hitting the door. 200 pounds of muscle was throwing itself against the frame of the side entrance. The wood was groaning. The hinges were screaming. The intruder, later found to be part of a crew that had hit 3 other houses on that road, had made a mistake. He had assumed the house was empty because the truck was gone. He had smashed the side window and climbed halfway inside. But he never made it to the floor, because staring him in the face, in the pitch-black darkness of the mudroom, were 2 amber eyes and a set of jaws that could crush a femur like a dry twig. King didn't have to bite. The sheer, overwhelming sound of his fury was enough to send the man back through the window, leaving behind a pry bar and his dignity. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was long gone, but he had left a trail of blood on the jagged glass, and a dropped cell phone that would eventually lead to the entire crew's arrest. The home! Nadia arrived home at 7:15 a.m. to find 2 squad cars in her driveway. Her heart stopped. She thought of King. She thought of her house. But as she stepped out of the truck, the officer didn't approach her with bad news. He pointed to the porch. There was King. He was lying in his usual spot, chewing on a thick oak stick he'd found in the yard. His tongue was hanging out sideways. He looked calm. He looked satisfied. "Your dog saved your house, ma'am," the officer said. "The other houses on this road? They're cleaned out. Tools, jewelry, a vehicle. But here, they didn't get past the window. I think they saw him and decided their lives were worth more than your TV." Nadia walked up the steps. She didn't say anything. She just sat down on the creaking wood and buried her face in the thick, coarse fur of King's neck. He didn't move. He just leaned his weight into her, his tail hitting the porch with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud. Conclusion. Today, King is 4 years old. The couch still leans permanently to the left. The bed is still 80% dog. And every single evening, before Nadia leaves for her shift, King performs his final ritual. He grabs her left boot in his mouth and carries it to the door. He sits on it. He stares at her with those amber eyes, as if to say, "Stay home. I've got the watch, but I'd rather have you." Nadia stopped telling people she was fine, living out there alone. She started telling them she was protected. When a stray shows up on your porch with no name and no collar, the world might tell you to turn them away. They might tell you they're too big, too scary, or too much work, but sometimes they aren't lost at all. Sometimes they are exactly where they were meant to be. Nadia didn't find King.